Okay, so for anybody that doesn't know who I am, I'm Bud Silcox. Recently moved to the Ben Salem office. Not that I was in this office a whole lot. I'm not sure how I became the oil tank expert, but
I was wondering that myself.
yeah.
A lot about it.
Not really, but I've dealt with them, I guess, many times through deals and through my own property, so I have some
That's even better.
working knowledge. Is anybody here because they're having a oil tank issue at the moment? I figured that would get your attention. You're in a deal with a problem, or
Yeah.
you have the buyer or the seller?
Buyer.
Okay.
Yeah.
And they did testing and has issues?
Well, now we're trying to do all of that. It wasn't an issue before, and now all of a sudden it is, and it's a mess.
Okay. Well, I guess let me start with a few important things, I think, with the underground oil tanks. First of all, if you're working in this area, Levittown is loaded with them, of course. I think the most important thing is to take out of this is you want to deal with it ahead of time, before you go on the market. If it's an older tank, if you have any clue that it's an original Levittown oil tank, it's got an issue. If it's not leaking, it's going to any minute. That's just, I haven't run across one yet that's an original tank that's not bad. If the seller knows that it's been replaced in the last 20, 25 years, then you might be okay. But if it's older than that, you probably have issues, and you want to at least address it ahead of time, because you have more options before there's a buyer involved. Once there's a buyer involved, then you have somebody else that's controlling what you do or don't do, and you know, and a lot of times it blows the deal anyway, because the buyer doesn't want to deal with it. Another big misconception with oil tanks is, I'm sure you've heard, a lot of people have heard the stories about the $50,000, $75,000 cleanup nightmares that people run into with oil tanks, which does happen. But what I didn't know until only a few years ago is there is no regulations, Pennsylvania or federal, that says you have to clean up an oil spill, because the tank is under 1,100 gallons. Most home oil tanks are. They are exempt from that requirement. Now, there's some exceptions to that. If the leak is affecting a groundwater source or a regular water source, a creek or a stream or anything like that, then that's different. Then it does have to be handled. Of course, the groundwater is a little bit questionable too, because you know, how far down before you hit the water table, and is it an issue or not an issue. But I have had many occasions where I've had leaks and have either partially remediated or not remediated at all. So just because it leaked doesn't necessarily mean that you got to spend a ton of money and remediate.
So if it's under, would you say how many?
1,100 gallons is the limit, and they set it at that point for a reason, because most home heating tanks are under 1,000 gallons, or 1,000 gallons or less. So they are pretty much excluded from having to report it to DEP and having to get them involved. Again, unless it's affecting a direct water source. So that being said, as far as tank testing goes, the first page I gave you is a company that I've used, ATS Environmental. I'm sure there's many of them in our area. That's just one I'm familiar with, I've used, and I've had buyers that use them. I think they do a pretty good job. They're testing, last time I used them, it was $425 to do a soil sample and a corrosion test, which is typically what they recommend doing on an oil tank. What they do is they drill holes, they ram a thing down into the ground, so they take a sample that's below the bottom of the tank. They test those samples, and they also they put some electrodes or something on the tank, and they do some kind of corrosion measurement. So, problem with that is, again, if the tank's older, if it's more than 25 years old, it's going to have some corrosion. It just is. And I've had the situation, I had one in Yardley where it was an original tank, it was in the ground 40 years. The samples were clean, it wasn't leaking, but it showed that it was highly corroded. And I represented the seller, and I tried to get out of it, but the buyer So even if it's not leaking, that corrosion test, you know, is gonna come up corroded if it's more than so many years old. And you're still probably gonna have an issue to deal with if the buyer is concerned about it. Yeah.
You look first.
I'm kind of getting to the chase here, but if you're representing the buyer, would you just say, we want it out of there? I mean, do you have to have backup to say, what would you do if you were representing a buyer and you ran into that situation where
Well-
you knew it was 40+ years? Because I know I just sold a house that was the original tank in Levittown, 60 years old. I mean,
You can go that route if you want and just say it right from the beginning with your offer. Like, I'm not even gonna waste the money on a test. We want the oil tank on. Depending on the knowledge that the seller's agent has or the seller has, it might be a little bit of a sell because if the agent doesn't know better. Like, I know, I've seen it. There's no original tank that's not having issues. So it probably wouldn't be a bad idea to address it first. How I have addressed it with my buyers depends on the buyer. I try to tell them what I'm telling you and what I know and let them make their own decision because every buyer's different. I had a buyer who bought in North Park, had an old oil tank. Now he was buying it, it was an as-is estate sale, and we talked about the oil tank and he could care less. He's like, it doesn't bother me at all, I can deal with it, and that was just the type of buyer he was. So for him it wasn't an issue. For other buyers it's going to be a big issue. They're going to be more scared by it and not want to deal with it.
I sold a house in Thornridge, it was original, and I demanded that they take it out. There was no corrosion at all.
Really?
Crazy, yeah.
That is amazing. I haven't heard that.
I know, the guy who took it out, he says, I've never seen anything like this before.
And it was definitely the original.
That's what they said, yeah. You know, that's what his estimate, that's what his thought was too.
I guess it happens. I do know that the more wet the area is, like the higher the water table, the bigger chance of the corrosion. And I know a lot depends on too and how it's put in, because what I've been told is that tanks are coated in like a tar substance when they go in the ground, but depending on whether, while they're putting it in, if they scratch that tar or not, then that gives you a spot that doesn't have the protection. But if it goes in clean and they didn't, you know, nick it up or whatever, then I guess it lasts a lot longer.
So would you go through the years again? So if you're the seller and the tank is, how old, what was the age?
I'm saying if you're 20, 25 years old or younger, you're probably okay, at least from what I've seen. It seems like, you know, and I think that tanks have gotten better over the years too, so they hold up better, but there's no guarantee. You still, if you represent the buyer, might want to get it tested, regardless of how old it is.
Would you ever suggest that the seller do it? Or that just open up a can of worms?
As representing the seller,
Before
or
you even get to a buyer,
As a proactive.
as a proactive thing, so it doesn't kind of like blow up in your
if I
face.
represent the seller,
Yeah.
yes, I want to deal with it before we
So
go
you
on the
have
market.
control of it,
Because
right?
it's just going to blow up a deal if they test it and it comes up bad. And again, if it's, I have the conversation with the seller and I kind of leave it up to them. If we know it's somewhat newer, then we might just let it go and have the buyer test it or not test it. But if it's been in there a while, I would recommend that they test it so they deal with it ahead of time. They can either put out there that, hey, we did the test and here's the results, which is a selling feature, or they deal with it on their terms as far as digging it up and whether or not they do or don't remediate the soil. Do you have a question?
A few questions. You might be covering this, but is there first a township that requires that it be above ground instead of in ground?
Not that I'm familiar with. I've dealt with Lower Makefield, Bristol, Bensalem, Falls. So they're the ones that and Lower Southampton. None of them.
I'm surprised. And second, the old tank, when they decide to put a new tank, are they required to be above ground, or are they allowed to put them back?
No, they can put them back in.
And if they decide to go on ground, above ground, and you have the old tank there, can they just fill it with sand, or do they have to remove it? Do you know?
You can fill it with sand. I haven't had one where we've done that, and the next page on here is for Professional Tank and Environmental. They're the company that I use for removal of the tanks and remediation work. They've always told me that it's better just to remove it than to try and, because you still have the same issues. They still have to test the soil. They're still going to go down, so if it's leaking, you know,
Right.
it's gonna be found no matter what, but the price difference really isn't there. They said the best bet is just to get it out of the ground.
I don't know why I thought one township was saying that they had to remove it and the other one says no, it's okay. Any thoughts about the tank being in the basement? Some tanks are in the basement instead of in the ground. Is that I know there's a couple that I've heard in the past where they leak in the basement and there's a problem. They have to do environmental cleanup on that, but
I haven't run into that. In general, the tank is gonna last longer in the basement because it's not exposed to the elements. But I haven't run into a situation where they were leaking in the basement, I guess depending on whether it's buried, behind walls or not, whether you would see it when it started before it got bad and could address it. I just haven't come across it, but I would think it would be better in the basement than in the ground, if it were my opinion.
I'm really surprised the townships are not making them required to be above.
They don't care if you go back in the ground.
Okay, so with kind of adding on to his thing, like if the seller leaves the tank underground and empties it themselves, cuts it off, but has no permit, is that allowed, or wouldn't they need a permit from the township to do that?
The seller is allowed to do it themselves. I don't know of any townships that don't require a permit though. Now, it's different, the townships are all different. Middletown's one of the easiest because they don't come out and inspect it all. You get the permit and the seller could do it themselves, they never come and look at it. Bristol Township, they do, because when I have them come out and do the work, the township inspector has to be there when they dig.
So you do need a permit.
You do need a permit. I don't know of anywhere that doesn't require a permit, even if the seller does it.
Okay, well, that's what is one of my situations, they have no permit for this underground tank, and they put a new one on the side of the house, and he emptied it himself,
How long ago did he do that, do you know?
2006.
Yeah,
Some townships didn't require a permit back then. What township was it?
Bristol?
Yeah, you have to ask, because I
Yeah.
always go and I pull permits, and laws change, so you have to find out when the law changed, so it may be valid.
I would be surprised in 2006 Bristol didn't require a
Yeah.
permit, but, you go back far enough, like in the 50s, that you didn't need a permit. It's just a matter of when did they start it.
Yeah.
I would think that it was pre-2000s, but I don't know. You would have to ask the township that.
Tori, I have a question. You said you pulled the permits. So
Yeah.
what do you go to the township building and you can actually go into?
There's
Yeah.
a right to know law, so you can request, there's a form, and you can send an email, fax, whatever, or just drop it off, and you can get information on every property in Pennsylvania.
Yep, every township.
Every township has it, so it's a
Like,
good way,
what kind of information you have to?
well, permits,
They'll
that's,
pull-
that's.
they all have a
Permits.
folder on the property that will
Yes.
have any permits or anything in it.
Mhm.
Sometimes they just let you look through the folder, sometimes they'll copy it for you.
Yeah, it depends on how voluminous it is,
Mm.
sometimes they'll just say there are no permits pulled, or they're all closed, or, they will give you a rundown on what it was that was done to the house.
Yeah,
Bristol
sometimes,
did it over the phone with me, no
Yeah,
problem.
it depends on how.
It depends.
Just the township you called for that?
yeah,
Yes, every township, at the township building, you can set, there's that right to know.
yep.
Then you just, if it is required, you just ask for a waiver, or whatever they call it. I call it a waiver, but it can, if a permit is required on something and you don't have it, then you just ask the township to do a
Variance.
father clause, a variance to it.
Something that was done prior, you mean?
Yeah,
So do you have the seller or the buyer? You have the seller when you're doing that, right?
yeah, the seller should do it.
So the
If
seller
you're-
should call up and say, I didn't get a permit, or,
Well, they maybe bought the house and they didn't know that they needed, say that your seller
uh-huh,
bought the house with something that was done prior and they had no clue that there was never a permit put on it,
got it.
then they can just call the township and ask them to do a variance and they would just.
Yeah, I don't know that
it's-
that's really gonna
in the thing.
do anything, because it's still gonna say that there was no permit when the work was done.
Well, it just covers them. They may come out and re-inspect it and they may say, you need to tear that wall down or whatever it is, or the oil tank or whatever, but at least it covers them. And if they come out and re-inspect it and everything's okay. But I had the same problem when at the house in Vermillion Hills, we had a big addition on the back of it with the fireplace, and the guy never got a permit to put it up 2 owners ago.
Right.
Nobody ever checked it. I went to buy the house, and of course I checked for all the permits, and there wasn't one. And Falls Township just came out, re-inspected, said, yeah, it's not gonna fall down.
So what
They
was
do
the,
a post, they will do a post, cause I know I've had,
Yeah, but they'll label it as, you know, just a post inspection,
Yeah.
they didn't get to do any footing inspections, any,
is that what you wanted, though? You just want them
Inspection.
to inspect it to make sure for the buyer it was okay? Is
It's
that
up
the
to-
purpose?
It's up to the township, and I just called the township, and they just came out
Because you're
and
the
looked at
buyer.
it, and put a note in the record that they looked at it, and it was fine.
in order to get a use and occupancy,
Yeah.
sometimes, like, I had a shed on a property in Falls Township, and, I mean, it was crazy because, and not to get away from the subject why we're here, but, they never got the permit, but then they did a Google Earth search, and they found a photograph that thing had been there pre-1986 or whatever, and they were okay with it, but I'm just saying that.
yeah. All right, so we'll get into now, if you do have to have the tank removed, or you decide you're gonna have the tank removed, again, there's probably several companies, my experience with Professional Tank, they do a good job. For most tanks, townships in this area, the fee to remove it is between $700 and $1,000, and really only varies as far as the cost of the permits.
7 to 10,000?
2,000.
To remove the underground
Seven
tank.
To remove an underground tank, $700 to $1,000 is typically what they cost. Now, if they remove it, they find that it's been leaking and there's contaminated soil, now's where you've got to decide what you want to do. Through Professional Tank, what they do if you're going to remediate, try to remove the soil, and why I like them too is they do a ton of these, and they can give me an idea usually whether they think it's a lot or not a lot there. But their initial removal is I think it's $4,500, and they remove 20 tons of soil for that. And what's good is there is a grant program in Pennsylvania where they'll reimburse you $4,000. You have to show that you spent $1,000, there's like a $1,000 deductible, but between the cost to remove the tank and the $500 difference between the 45 and the 4,000, you'll easily meet that requirement. As of right now, they're out of funds, but they refund again, I think in July. They get $500,000 a year goes into that fund for that grant. It does take a little time to get it once you fill out the paperwork, but Professional Tank will actually do all the paperwork for you and submit it. It takes probably 3 months to get the actual check back when they have the funds. And what's good is even if you have to do the work now when they're out of funds, you can still submit it, and when they get their funds, they'll still honor your request. So that helps a lot. I've done that on a few occasions where I've spent the $4,500. I don't know the percentages. I'm going to say 50% of the time. That it might even be higher than that. That gets all the contaminated soil and you're clean, and they can give you a cert that everything's clean. And then the other half of the time, it doesn't do it. And you can continue to go. They have from that point on, they give you a price per ton or whatever it is to continue removing the soil. And I've had them, again, because they're fairly experienced, they have testers that they can test the soil right on the spot, and they know by how contaminated it is, if they're getting close or if they got a lot more to do. And I've had situations where they say, hey, we're still going, we got a lot more to do, and I'm like, all right, that's it, that's as far as we're going, close it up, and now I just have to disclose that there was contamination and I didn't remove it. So again, on the buyer, and I've had a couple situations where I had the seller, buyer didn't care. I gave them the information, that shows that nobody requires it to be cleaned up. It's not affecting the groundwater, it is what it is, and they were fine with it. I'm sure you're gonna have situations where a buyer isn't gonna be fine and they want it completely gone, but, go ahead.
Okay, what if they started out fine with it, wasn't an issue. Week before closing, all of a sudden, it's an issue. Now I have to like dig more into it, find out like.
Well, how did it get to be an issue that far in?
We went literally from her celebrating on Friday that she got her mortgage commitment to I don't know if somebody said something to her, or she just started, like, I think her fiance, like, dug more into it, like, she says she understands, like, it's not like they're going into it blinded, like, they understood, but now all of a sudden they're, like, now they have concern.
But did they do a tank test when they did it?
No, they didn't. It wasn't an issue in the beginning.
So
Like,
they don't really have an out at this point.
Yeah, they
No,
don't.
well,
I mean, they do.
unless they drop the whole deal, right?
Well, they,
Well,
they
They
can.
lose the deposit.
Lose a deposit, yeah.
Yeah,
They don't.
Yeah.
but here's the thing, like, they didn't, like, I'm trying to find some loopholes or something, like, if, like, in 2006, if Bristol Township required a permit, like, why didn't they even ever have that permit, and how are they even allowed to sell that house without a permit? Is that even possible?
Yeah, it's right, it's 50,
Like, if he's sitting there,
Yeah,
if he
yeah.
cut it, he emptied it, he did it all himself without a permit, then why should?
yeah. Mhm.
You know, I mean, at first they were satisfied with that answer, because, you know, we were going back and forth, but then they just
Okay.
decided it was a
Yeah,
non-issue.
thank you so much.
So-
Okay.
So the seller disclosed that from the beginning on the seller's disclosure, that that's what they did?
Well, no, it's not on the seller's disclosure from me asking and finding out about it. But they loved the house so much, they were satisfied with that answer. And they didn't wanna, they just wanted the house. But now all of a sudden, it's an issue.
Well, maybe try having a discussion with the buyer, unless you have already, with what I'm telling you now about, that it's, because everybody hears the nightmare stories and they think, oh my God, this might cost me $80,000 to clean this up. And I didn't know, so I'm sure most people don't know that you don't necessarily have to. It's not like we have a ton of wells around here that it's affecting their drinking water,
Right.
What are
so.
they worried about, that it's all contaminated?
Yeah,
Did they fill the tank or just cap it? That's a good question.
they said they capped it.
Well, see, they need to fill
Needs to
it,
be
and if
filled,
they
yeah.
don't fill it, then it's gonna collapse. And especially if there's no oil in
Right.
it, it's gonna collapse, and you're gonna have a big hole there. So the issue really is, did they fill it or they didn't fill it? And then if they didn't fill it, then you got a problem.
And what township is it, Bristol?
Is that because
Bristol.
it's sand?
Was it in the seller's
It's supposed to
disclosure?
be saying,
No,
but
So why can't they just leave it
not
away?
any kind of detail like that,
Just
no.
an empty.
It just
It's still-
said that
it's not-
it
it's
was
still in the
the
ground.
heater in 2006.
Oh, it's still in the ground.
yes.
Ah.
And the heater was, the tank was still in the ground. It says
Right.
that in the,
No, oh yeah, it does say that. It does say that it's still underground, but it didn't go into any kind of
So you
detail.
gotta find out if it was filled with sand, is what Tim's saying.
Okay.
Find out if it was filled with sand,
Mhm.
because what will happen, Tim
And do
said, is
foam
it will
also.
it's still in the ground, right?
Yeah.
It can collapse, he said.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
And then what's gonna happen is
you
the
got
whole
a
ground's
sinkhole
gonna, you're
there.
gonna have a
Yeah.
sinkhole.
Mhm.
It may take
Okay.
10, 20 years to happen,
But
but
it'll
someday
happen.
it's gonna happen.
Okay, so if it's an empty tank, it could sink.
Yeah, just say, is it empty or did you fill it with anything? Don't even tell them sand, cause you could just say, yeah.
they can't test it out?
Well, we're trying to get the seller to let us do that now,
Yeah.
because then if the, yeah.
So it wasn't on the seller's disclosure,
well, it was
What-
said that it
what-
was there in the ground, but nothing else.
but, it said it was in the ground.
Right, it said it was in the ground, but it didn't say like what they did to, you know.
Yeah, I
They
don't know
didn't
what you get.
disclose then, they
It
didn't
is
disclose what they did, pretty much.
Yeah.
No, but it
Well, I
doesn't
think
necessarily ask, it
under
just
the
says,
terms
are there
of-
any abandoned tanks,
yeah,
if they
it doesn't
disclosed
say.
I
it.
never did an oil tank yet, so, they don't ask that, huh?
On the seller's disclosure, they don't.
No, they
That would
just
be our
ask-
due diligence to find out, well, was it ever, you're not using it now, what did you do?
Right, which I did do, and they were satisfied with that answer, so, I just, this is my second deal. Like, I didn't, you know what I mean,
Sorry.
like,
Yeah.
I wish I would've, like,
You have to cover yourself, is like, I think what you have to do, so if you know you did everything, then,
Right.
which you did, right?
Well-
You suggested that they,
yeah, like I thought, like whatever they want, we put it on the reply, they didn't wanna even, she said I remember her saying she didn't even wanna ask for a lot of stuff, like they wanted the house, they didn't care.
So, but,
They
because
went
she,
one thing to another.
what would you suggest that she, so she can learn from this, right? What would you suggest she should have done?
Why are
But
you
you
know
already
that
know.
now?
Well,
I
Well,
know
we can
for
all
sure
learn from
now.
this, so.
Yeah,
That's what I'm telling you, because I didn't.
Yeah.
I mean, other than,
If someone's like, they're okay.
it's difficult to hear it from now and say, go back and do it this way, but other than trying to keep everything as much as you can in writing, like if you've had these, if you ask the seller questions, was it by phone or do you have email?
Oh, I
or-
have it in writing.
So at least you have a little bit of a
That's why I
trail,
like to email.
and hopefully you have somewhere where the buyer said in writing that they're fine, you know what I mean?
That I do have that in writing. You know, on email, I print it all up.
So that's good, I mean, I think that would protect you for the most part, because you ask the questions and,
Cause I even
The
said,
fact
are
that they're
you sure
changing-
there's nothing else you would like to add besides the chimney and the outlets and whatever?
Mm-hmm.
And she said, no, and she actually even specified that the only issue she was concerned about with, the underground tank was getting home insurance. And that wasn't even an issue, she was able to get home insurance. And, you know, that's the only thing, it says in black and white, that was her only concern about that, so,
If
Yeah,
she
it's
walks
just-
away, she's gonna lose her
Yeah.
deposit.
Which house did she put down?
4,000.
When was that, is that?
Well, yesterday she said she was, you know, if she was gonna lose the money, she was fine with it, rather than, I don't know, cause I think she thinks it's gonna be like this big expense. But they love the house, it's like, I don't even, like,
Who's the
that's one
listing
thing,
agent?
huh?
Who's the listing agent?
Robin Cameron,
no, okay.
Oh, she's a little tough, but,
she is tough,
yeah.
she told, like, she,
Yeah, and she's not gonna open up the can of worms now and say, yeah, go ahead and do a test, because you don't really have the right to do it.
Right, we're out of our, you're out of the,
That would be my thing, is to talk to the buyer, because if it was me personally buying, it wouldn't really concern me a whole lot,
right.
because I know it's not affecting anything, even if there was a leak there at this point.
Right.
Uh,
And that's the
Other
other
than if
thing,
it's
like, I
not
grew up
filled,
in
like you
Levittown,
said, but you can also
underground
address
tank.
that at this
It's never
point.
an issue, you know what I mean, like, I just didn't think to,
Yeah.
like, it would be this much of an issue, I just can't even.
Yeah, I don't know what changed their mind of it.
I think they were doing like more extent, I don't even know what provoked them to do that, I don't, like, you know, somebody said something to them and that provoked them to look more into it, but,
you might have to call one of these companies too, just to, you know, pick their brain apart and get, make them, maybe they can make her, your buyer
What section
feel a
is
little
it
bit
in?
better.
Golden Ridge. It's not like a crick or anything.
No, I know a couple of them are low, I don't think that's one of them.
It doesn't look like it, it's like right, it actually backs up to the main, road, Emily Road,
Yeah, okay.
so it's, you know.
Or right off garbage coming off the road.
Yeah, right.
Tank.
Yeah.
At this late stage, couldn't they go and on their own do a soil test?
Well, that's what we're trying to do now.
Well, while they're in the middle of the deal, no.
Yeah, on their own, I mean, you know, just pay the people and have them come do a soil test?
Not without the seller's permission.
Yeah,
You
the
can't
seller's
just-
gonna absolutely deny it.
Yeah,
Really?
yeah, oh,
Sure,
yeah.
because you're out of the, we're no
Well,
longer,
we tried to tell them like, they're better off just like nip it in the bud, because the next person's gonna have, you know, somebody's gonna inquire about it again, like you said, like she should have just,
She should have addressed it from the beginning.
right, and
It's-
then there wouldn't be these issues.
Right.
I actually said the same thing from the start, like, why would you even list the house knowing that there would be an issue?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I think that's the most important thing to take out of this is deal with it ahead of time.
Right.
Tell your seller to deal with it ahead of time.
And
Make
she's
sure
a
you have
owner.
all your ducks in a row, because it's much easier than when you get to this point and you get a
Right.
buyer that wants to walk out. Now, they've gotten to the point where they really can't, but if it happened during the inspections,
Okay,
they could easily get
that's fine,
freaked
you
out
just put the whole, yeah,
and walk away.
put the whole
I
amount.
think
in
at
the
this
card.
point, you just wanna be the hero to your buyers,
Okay.
and just do a
Right.
little bit of legwork,
Yeah,
call the township, see if there is a permit,
yeah,
and then send an email over to the agent and ask them if it's been filled or not, and then give that information to your client, and you done what you had to do, and let your client make a decision from there.
yeah. Well, I tried calling, Bristol Township, but they're having some issues with their phones, so I'm waiting for them to call me
You
back.
probably didn't pay the phone bill.
you can fax it, that form is on their website,
Mhm.
and you can email actually to them. And they get, it's pretty fast. It's called the right to know. And you just ask about, yes.
All townships that have that?
Well, I know
Just Bristol?
All
Everyone's,
townships.
everyone does, yes.
Oh, really, that's good to know.
Filling the tank, is that a legal issue? I mean, do you have to get it done legally, or can you do it yourself?
Removing the tank?
No, filling it, or emptying it and filling it with sand.
I would assume it's the same way. I know you can, remove it yourself as the owner.
Yes.
You can,
Yes, you
Okay.
can get it, you have to get a permit, but you are allowed to remove it yourself.
Oh.
Whether fill it yourself, I don't
Yes.
know.
do you require a permit for filling it too?
Yes,
You do require.
yeah. Now, I've never had one filled, and from my understanding, it's just as much money and just as much work, because they have to clean it first, make sure that it's flushed and everything, which is why I don't know you could do it yourself as an owner. I don't know that you would have the equipment to do it. So,
But
that's,
that guy did that, right? This guy.
he did it on, whether he did it correctly with a permit, we don't know yet.
Yeah.
So if you were the seller for this house, and you knew the situation, how would you handle it as the realtor for the seller?
At this point, or before it's on the market?
Before, what would you have them do?
I would have told them that they need to have it done correctly. That, well, depending on what they did it with or without it, we need to get it tested, bring a company out so we can document that,
I
A,
see.
it's been checked, it's filled properly, because it's gonna be an issue for people.
It's gonna come up again. They want the house, like, they should just fix it and let's move on with this, you know what I mean?
They're not obligated to at this point because
Right.
they've passed the contingency period.
Right.
I
That's the
understand that,
problem.
but they're gonna have the same problem with the next person that wants it.
I agree with you, but it's a lot easier just to remove it than it is to fill it, because they don't bleach it and all that or whatever.
Yep,
Yeah.
yeah, if it's gonna cost the same amount of money, might as well take it out and put dirt in.
Mhm.
And dirt's gonna settle too. They mound it up when they do it, knowing that it's gonna settle down, so you do have a hump in the yard.
And how much would that cost? You said it was between $7,000 and $1,000, no?
To remove it, yeah,
Yeah, okay.
between 700 and 1,000. I've had it as cheap as Middletown. He did one for me that was $666. I can't forget that one.
Figure it's 270 gallons of sand, which is cubic, so that's probably about $2,000 in sand rolling,
Yeah,
you know?
I
Right.
heard that some
And then
companies
put in a
foam
little
it,
funnel.
put foam in, I don't know if that's
foam.
foam, yeah.
I don't know, like I said, I don't have any experience with that other than he's told me that it's not as simple as just filling it and being done. I know you have to clean it, so,
I read somewhere, last week, in fact, that filling it costs about half as much as having it removed.
it's not what I've been told.
Okay, I read it on one of these companies in New Jersey. They do this, the
Yeah.
removing and filling.
I don't know if they have different regulations in Jersey either. I just know, and I can't imagine, like I said, if it's $666 with permits, that they can fill it for much less than that. You're still gonna have to pay the permits and whatever work they have to do. And I don't remember if they cut it open still so that they can clean it. When you have it removed, they dig down and then before they completely remove it, they cut it open. They cut the top off and they go in and they clean it all out. Because if there is any oil left in it, they don't want to pull it out and all of a sudden it gives away and now you have a spill that they caused. So they cut it open, they go in, they clean it all out, and then they remove it. I don't know, I just haven't done it, so I don't know if they do the same thing, cut it open, clean it, and then fill it, or if they can do it through the fill. I don't know.
They said they, on the website, they said they cut it and then they pump all the oil and everything else in it, out, and then they fill it with sand.
So I can't imagine why it would be half the cost.
I don't know.
The only thing you're saving is pulling the tank the rest of the way out, which they sell for scrap and get money for, so,
Yeah.
I don't know. It would surprise me that it would be less. So let me get back on, the remediation part of it. I started talking about that. So you have at least with this company, they have an initial $4,500 to $5,000 fee for the first load of dirt that they take out of it. And then when it goes beyond that, now I've had them, again, in some situations, tell me, you know what, we're almost there, like a couple more tons and it's clean. So for me, and this was on a property I was flipping, so I was spending the money, it was worth it. I said, that's fine, I'll spend a couple $100 more to know that it's completely clean. But if they're telling me that, hey, this is gonna keep going, then I've told them, all right, fill it up, give me the paperwork, they give you what's called a tank closure report, everything you need for the township, and it has all the testing, and it'll show that the soil levels are still above whatever, you know, limit they call, but again, there's no requirement to continue remediating. So, you just have to disclose that, obviously, when you're selling the house, but at least you have that option. If you have a buyer involved, most likely the buyer's not gonna agree to stop. They're gonna wanna completely clean it up. And that's where you could run into a ton of money or, throw the deal away and start over. I think that's all I wanted to say about the oil tanks. Any more questions about them?
I do. A problem that happened with me in my deal right now, you know, we had it in the agreement of sale to have it tested and checked. They did come, they tested it, everything is fine, the soil is fine, you know, pressure test is okay. Now they came back with their report and they said they need that fill, the vent tube to be raised
Extended.
to 24 inches before they'll issue a final. And they quoted some regulation from the National Fire Safety, whatever, and I went and joined them and I checked it, and all it says is that it should be reasonably above, you know, the ground.
I know there's a new code requirement for the height of the fill in the vent. I don't know whether it's I don't know where it comes into play. I've never seen it. I just know if they put them in today, that the fill and the vent are much higher than the ones that have been in there, which is sometimes can give you an idea of the age of the tank. If you see a real low fill and vent, it's old, because it is a code somewhere. I don't know if it's a building code, a fire code.
It's a fire code, and because they referenced it, and they said, you know, raise it to 24 inches.
But it doesn't specify 24, it just says.
In the code, it doesn't specify, but these guys, ATS actually, they specified in their letter, our technician states that it should be moved to 24 inches,
Okay.
which is a lot, 2 feet above.
They're high, yeah. That's why, when I see them high, I know it's a newer tank.
Cause they vented, is that why? It's being vented or?
I don't know why, I guess they're trying to guard against groundwater, but why it needs
No,
to be
they-
24 inches, I don't know.
What they mentioned was that they were guarding against ice and snow,
Oh, okay.
covering it up, but
If
24
you're in
inches.
Boston, you better have the thing go.
Yeah.
And you can't put a cap, is there a cap on it?
There is a cap on it, they said raise it and then cap it with a galvanized cap or whatever, and then send us the pictures and the invoice, and then we'll issue the report.
They're really not a great idea, I don't know. I wouldn't recommend anybody putting them in the ground, even though today you can get fiberglass ones, so I guess you don't have the corrosion, but
I wouldn't even get oil,
I would rather have it above ground and build something around it or cover it with some
I would
bushes.
put gas heat in.
But is the seller responsible for that,
For,
for raising that? Because, you know, we did specify that we needed the tank to be,
Certified?
are you representing the buyer?
yes.
Then I would say yes.
Yeah.
I mean, you can go back at that point and say, this is what they're telling us, it needs to be done, ask the seller to do it. I don't think that's a huge expense, though, raising it.
No, I checked with Lisa, and she said, she talked to somebody and said it's about $50.
Yeah,
It's basically nothing, but, you know,
yeah, I would say if you're
out of the blue, they
negotiating
come
against the
up with
seller.
this thing that, you know, you need to raise it 24 inches. And the clause doesn't specify that. I went in, it's a huge book of codes, and I read that specific code, and it doesn't mention.
I would, you have it from them saying that's what they need to certify it, I would ask the seller to do it, and let the seller find that it doesn't need to be done if they wanna do the research.
Okay.
But I'm going back to that reimbursement program. If
Mhm.
someone took the tank out and got it, a new one put in say, January, February this year, and they sold it, moved into their house, they didn't know about this, are they able to go back and try to get or is it like when it happens, that's when you have to do it?
I don't know,
I was
there's a
trying
whole
to think.
website for it, which I
Yeah, I'll
probably didn't
just-
print out,
okay.
but,
That's myself, I'll just go on there then.
oh yeah, I did. The last page is
Yeah,
the,
that's what I was reading, I didn't see,
there's a lot of links in here that tell you more about it, they might
yeah,
be
I'll
able to
look
get
into
through it
then.
and see.
Okay,
I don't know how far back you can go.
okay,
I've seen the paperwork, like they had it removed by somebody professionally.
yes,
Did they had cleanup done?
yes. Yeah.
Okay. And
It
they
was,
did,
it was actually in Montgomery County.
Yeah,
But
it
it was
shouldn't
just somebody
matter.
I know that had it done, and I don't know if, they were aware of this.
Hey, you would think the company that did it would tell them about it. That's how I learned about it. But,
Okay,
I know they have to fill out information, because on the form it wants to know like where the dirt went and stuff that they're not
Yeah.
gonna know.
okay.
But they can go back to whoever did it and get that information. Okay?
Thank you.
Now, anybody want the bonus class?
Sure.
Want to talk about radon at all?
Sure.
Yes.
Sure.
I think it's a ripoff in its face. What do you do?
Well, I know a little bit about it, that's why I thought I would talk about it. Back before I became a realtor, I used to work for a company called Nuclear Research Corp. And we made radiation monitoring equipment for power plants and for the government and stuff. So I have a little bit of experience with radon and radiation. And all I really wanted to add is I try to educate my buyers a little bit. I tell them what I know. At the same time, you also, if you're telling your buyers this or your sellers, always want to point out that, hey, I'm not an expert, and you should probably do your own research or talk to somebody who is an expert. But here's from my experience or what I've heard. So radon, for those who don't know, it's a odorless, tasteless gas that is pretty much everywhere. There's radon in this room, I'm sure. Just a matter of the quantity of it, whether it's considered harmful or not. The easiest way to think of it is like the radiation from the sun. The more you're exposed to it, the worse it is for you. So if you're out in the sun, you live in, South Florida and you're in the sun every day, there's a good chance you're going to get skin cancer. It's just your exposure rate is more. So, the EPA's come up with this guideline of 0.4 picocuries per liter as where you want to be as far as a safe level. Again, it's more your exposure to it. So if you have a house with a finished basement and a bedroom in it, and somebody's sleeping there 8 hours a day, they have a lot of time they're spending in that level of the home. I would be much more concerned about the radon level then. If it's a unfinished basement that you use for storage or going down to do laundry, I would be less concerned because you're not spending much time in the lowest level of the home, which is where the radon for the most part is going to be highest in concentration. So I use that as, information as well, because that might help guide them depending on the house configuration and how they're using the lowest level of the house. And then also radon is very intermittent. You have days when it's higher and days when it's lower. It depends on atmospheric conditions, it depends on the groundwater and things like that. And as most of us probably know, it's a gas, so it vents out. You open the door, you open a window, it vents out. The level will go down. It takes a while to build back up again. So a couple things you have to keep in mind is when you're doing a real estate transaction, you're doing a short-term radon test. It's in that property for 48 to 72 hours typically. You may have picked a bad or a good point of time to do that test.
Not yet.
So, you have to decide how concerned are you about that reading, whether it's accurate or not. If you're real concerned about what the radon is going to be, I would do a long-term test, which is you get a canister, you hang it up, it can stay in the house for up to a year, and then you send it away to be tested. It's going to give you a much more accurate reading of what your radon level really is through the seasons and through, living in the house and stuff. If you choose to do that, you're giving up the opportunity to go after the seller and have the seller pay for a radon system if you need it. But you do know for sure whether you need it. I do, representing both sides, buyer or seller, and I hate when you get a radon test and it's 4.2. That's like, okay, it's slightly above it, but it might have been a little high on this reading, it might have been a little low, it might be worse than what we're thinking. So I usually recommend doing a long-term test afterwards to my seller or my buyers, but it's really up to them. If it's a concern to them, if it is a finished basement they're spending some time in and they want to do it, fine. But I just like to pass that information along.
How much is a radon system average?
$1,000, $1,200 now.
The people I use are usually between 800 and 1,000.
I just saw one go on.
Yeah, I don't think I've had any over 1,000. And
Definitely come down in the years.
yeah, radon's another thing too that the seller is allowed to do themselves. You can't do it unless unless you're licensed, that it's not your house. But if it's your house, you are allowed to put your own system in, if you happen to have somebody that's very handy, I guess. There's really not much to a system.
They need a permit for that, is there anything?
No, I don't think they do. As far as I know, I don't remember ever getting a permit for them.
And do you suggest a sub-ground tube?
Yeah, so that's why.
Something that goes, a tube that goes in below, below the ground?
Or,
I understand that's the most effective.
yeah, that's the only way I know of,
Okay.
at least the company I use. They break through the slab and you put a 4-inch, sometimes they do a 6-inch PVC pipe. And then it pipes outside and there's a fan unit. And basically it just pulls air from under the slab, so it gets it before it can come up and migrate through the concrete. I've seen some installations where they do a couple of them. Most of mine, they've only had to do one, and it's been fine. And then it vents up above the roof line. The fan has to be on the outside of the house. It's not allowed per code to be inside the house unless it's in the attic. So I think they could pull it all the way up and put the fan in the attic if they wanted to. And I think the idea is if that fan unit leaks, that it's not inside the house.
There's nothing to compare to because.
So the actual cost of the equipment, you can go online and buy the fan, buy whatever you want. It's not that much, it's the labor of doing it. And the other thing they'll do when they put it in is if there's a sump pump, they're gonna wanna seal it. They wanna close up any easy openings so that the gas can come in easier than being pulled out. So if there's a sump pump, they'll put a clear plastic over it and silicone all around it. If there's an open French drain or something around the edges, they wanna seal that. If there's a crawl space that's not, doesn't have a vapor barrier, they'll put plastic on the open ground.
Yeah, I had, two that had the radon systems in them, and, should I have had them tested? The radon system tested?
Mhm.
That
Yeah.
should have been,
Yeah, because I guess, the fan could stop working. I mean, there's all kind, I just sold a house that had a remediation system and it's still red high.
Oh, yeah?
Yes.
And it was running?
Yeah, so we had to get it modified or, updated, because maybe it had been in there for a while, and then once that happened, the test results were minimal at best.
Yeah, usually when I put them in, they give you a retest that you do with it, and the results come back really low. They usually do a good job. And they have the little anemometer, I guess it's called, the tube with the liquid in it, so you can see if it's pulling a vacuum.
Oh, that's what that is.
Yeah.
I mean, I knew that gives you a reading of how effective it is, but that's.
Well, that just gives you an indication that the fan's working. You want to
Okay.
see that at a different level, that means there's a vacuum. If it's even, then the fan's not on or it's not working.
Okay.
But, and that's, you might be thinking a little too far ahead, but if you have a cellar that has a wide open sump pit or something, and, the buyer's getting a radon test, it might be a good idea to close that up. It's only gonna help. I did have a property that I was selling that I personally owned that failed, came up with a high radon, and there was an old well from the basement. There was a tube in the wall where the pipes came through, and then went out to wherever the well was. The well had been removed, it was on public water, but the opening was still there. I sealed up the opening and retested it, and it dropped to almost nothing. So just that opening that was going directly to the well was allowing the radon to be high.
That fan run 24/7 or is it time? No, really?
And that's the other thing that I tell my buyers too, is even if I'm not paying for it, I wanna know if I really need that system. Because I'm sure it's not a lot of electric, but you're running a thing 24/7. It's gonna fail at some point, it doesn't run forever, and you're gonna have to replace it after you own the home. I wouldn't wanna do all that and have this ugly thing going at the side of my house if I didn't really need it, and it just happened to be reading high because whatever, the atmospheric conditions were high that day, or, whatever the case might be. And then at the same time too, I wouldn't necessarily trust if I was really concerned about it. I did this short-term test, I know it's supposed to be closed house conditions, but who's to say what that seller did? Not everybody's honest.
Right.
Maybe the seller decided to crack a window open and make sure they passed the test. Just things to keep in mind.
And the effects of radon are lung cancer, right? I mean, if you're exposed to it too long. And what's considered long-term exposure, like 6 months of sleeping down in a basement, 5 years, 2 weeks?
I don't know that there's any good answer to that question because it's still really an unknown. It's the same thing with,
Like smoking, some people, they
Yeah.
get lung cancer right
Yeah, some people do it, some people spend their whole lives and don't get it. So trying to quantify where, at what point it's dangerous, I think is very difficult to do. And how they came up with the number they came up with, I don't know. But, you know, we're exposed to radiation our whole lives. We get dental x-rays, we get regular x-rays, we fly, you know. So it's something that you want to be aware of. But it's really hard to quantify whether it's, or say, this is an issue, this isn't an issue, you know. I can tell you that in this area, it tends to be higher in rocky areas. I've sold a few homes in Belmont Hills and Ben Salem, very high radon readings, extremely high, like 30, like really high numbers. So if I'm doing something in an area like that, or Rockledge, probably not a bad idea to have it done.
One of the highest I have is Fearless Hills. It's
Really?
12. Yeah, and, you know, slab. But good or bad, I tell my sellers that if someone does ask for a radon test, so especially, okay, we've just had our houses all locked up all winter long, so there's no air movement, there's, so open up the
Right, you don't
windows,
want to be
let's try to
completely,
air it
because
out.
you will see vacant homes tend to have higher readings.
Yeah.
Because, you know, they're taking into account when they do that reading, I guess, that there is some access to the house going on. You know, people coming and going in a vacant house, if you're getting nobody going, nothing getting opened at all. My experience anyway, I think vacant houses always seem to be higher.
So I say, open up all windows, take a fan, blow out the air.
Yeah, start from a fresh
Yeah.
start, yeah. All right,
Yes, thank you so much.
Thank
hope that helps people. Hope it gets you through yours.
you.
No problem.
All right.
Okay.
Give me a second, I'll get it.
Are you going to ignite?
That's everything you got. I know it's on the